Welcome to The Honest Media. This is our first episode of 2018. It is January 4th, 2018. I'm Tom Pappert, your host, here with my co-host, Craig Chrysler, and we do have a special guest with us today. Joining us via the telephone, going old school today, is Izzy Lyman. She is a city council member for Petoskey, Michigan, and I hope I pronounced that right. She's also an adjunct professor for a couple universities. She is a homeschool advocate. I would frame her as an expert, and I wanted to get her opinion because if anybody who's been in Kansas for any amount of time knows that our schools are a mess, our educational system is a mess, and nobody seems to really know what the solution is except to give more and more money. So welcome to the show, Izzy.
Thank you so much, Tom, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And of course, I want to, mention again that Craig is here. He's suffering through the flu. I was last week. He is this week, but he managed to come to the studio with us. So thank you, Craig. We appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So, Izzy, I know that you've been most passionate in your personal life about homeschooling. And homeschooling in Kansas kind of has not the best connotation to it. People kind of look at it as both a way to to make the schools worse and make your child's education worse. So if you could just give us the quick elevator pitch for why homeschool your children.
Okay, the elevator pitch, I like that. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and also Craig, who I didn't acknowledge. I wanted to say that first. Homeschooling is great because of its flexibility. It's a custom-made kind of education. And actually, some of our founding fathers were home educated, like George Washington, for example. So its results are amazing when you can custom make the curriculum to the student and his needs, interests, desires, intellectual capacity, and on and on. That's right. Basically one of the great reasons. And the second great reason is that control the microphone, if you will. You know, they're the ones deciding what the child will learn, if he will learn, how he will spend the day, everything that you can imagine that comes with a custom-made education like that.
And now one thing, because you've talked about, you have the ability to really, like you say, customize your child's education.
Right.
What do you say about the people who say, I'm just a normal person. I don't have a PhD. I don't know how to be a teacher. I would ruin my child's education. Is there some merit to that, or are those people mistaken?
Right. And that's a common, let's say, concern or qualm. But let me point out really quickly that although I may have a PhD, but my first language is Spanish, not English.
Oh, really?
So again, everybody comes with something to the table that they're going to have to overcome. Whether it's chemistry or a schedule or something. It's not necessarily an easy decision. You have to work at it, just like everything else in life. If you're an entrepreneur, you got to work at business. If you want to be a great athlete, you got to work it out. So that is just part of it. Sometimes I think people are a little bit overwhelmed by that aspect of it because it's just not a thing in American society. But let me say there are plenty of resources out there today, more than there's ever been. There's online schools, there's online tutors, there's co-ops, and there's all kinds of wonderful role models that will give you an assist. So the scope of opportunity is limitless.
So, because you touched on something interesting, online schooling, and I want to get your opinion on that, but before we do, I want to ask how about socialization? Because I know at least one of your offspring, and he definitely has no problem with socialization at all whatsoever, but a lot of people say, what about homeschool kids? They're not going to have the experience with other kids. They're not going to have that, the jungle gym, who gets to climb on the jungle gym, mediating that, what's going to happen to children without this experiences. So what is your answer to that concern?
Yeah, exactly. I think that is the point a little bit of homeschooling too, that you don't want your child having to mediate the jungle gym or the bullies or the rest of it. There's a lot of socialization in let's say canned schooling, if you will, or union-led schooling that is very negative. And, we're constantly having conversations about people needing to be kind to each other in the schools and, all that kind of nonsense. So I personally think the socialization that can happen in the home is a superior product. because children are being, engaged, watched over, and it's a much more controlled atmosphere. However, to say that also, most homeschoolers I met in my many years of homeschooling my two sons were very social people.
Right.
They had their children either playing sports or playing in a community band or volunteering at a hospital or going to church
Sure.
classes. So that's kind of part and parcel of the homeschooling experience. I don't think most mainstream homeschooling parents do not want their children to miss out on appropriate social activities.
Well, and one thing I always tell people whenever that objection comes up with people I've known, which I'm at that age where lots of people are starting to have kids. So what I've always said is, is that experience, that jungle gym experience, is that representative of the real world? Have you ever gone to work and had somebody ask you for your lunch money? I mean, it's kind of a very strange dynamic in schools. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And most people at work are quick to complain when they don't get along with a coworker
Right.
or they have a snarly boss or they're not getting a promotion. They don't put up with that kind of nonsense.
Right, right.
So that's also how the real world works. We don't put up with, hostile, demeaning atmospheres to conduct our daily lives. So I don't understand why it's remotely acceptable for young children or teenagers.
Right, and to put them into that kind of dynamic and just say, well, that'll make you tougher, when, as you say, that's not how it is in the real world. But one thing that you touched on is online schools, which have actually exploded in Kansas, though there is, in the homeschooling community, there's some hesitation, I think, because, yes, you have a little bit more say over the curriculum, but you're still depending on the government, the federal government, for most folks, to come up with what your child needs to learn. So what is your take on online schools?
I think they're a great option, especially for parents who, like you mentioned earlier, are a little bit shy about just kind of plunging in and creating a curriculum and sitting at the kitchen table. They're a great option to the brick and mortar alternative. And, I'm very supportive of them. Of course, I would also have to see the content and
Right.
the curriculum to make sure it's, legit.
Right.
And not just fluffy stuff, a la John Dewey, Common Core, collectivist
Sure,
mode.
absolutely.
But, I understand. I was reading the other day a little bit about Taylor Swift, and she's actually a product of some kind of an online homeschool academy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think there's many people across the United States that have very good results with that model.
And I think you're going to have a hard time looking at Taylor Swift and saying that something could have been done to make her more successful. I think she's about reached the top of her game.
Yeah, I know, right? Like the queen here herself.
Right. We have to take a quick moment off. We're here with Izzy Lyman. She's a homeschooling advocate, and like I said, she's got a lot of other hats she wears, very important hats. We've got to take a moment off. You're watching The Honest Media. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back to The Honest Media. I'm Tom Papper, joined by my co-host, Craig Chrysler. And of course, our special guest this week is Izzy Lyman, a homeschool advocate for many, many years who really knows her stuff. And the next thing I wanted to talk about, Izzy, and I know it's, again, not necessarily what you have focused on extensively in your life, but charter schools. And for those who don't know, charter schools are sort of private, sort of not in most cases. A lot of people, states use voucher programs where a parent gets to take the money associated with their child and say, well, no, I want him to go to this school. And some charter schools focus on mathematics, some charter schools focus on other subjects. And some of them are just alternatives, and they've been very successful in places like Washington, D.C., in helping the people in the worst socioeconomic situations to helping their children succeed. But in Kansas, there is kind of a stigma against charter schools. In fact, as our friend Bob Weeks of WichitaLiberty.org and Wichita Liberty TV right here on the TV station likes to say, we have the Burger King chooses the McDonald's policy here in Kansas. The local school board actually gets to approve or disapprove the formation of any new charter school, which, as you can imagine, it's like letting Burger King decide if there's going to be a new McDonald's. There are no charter schools. So tell us, if you can, a little bit about your perspective as a homeschool advocate on charter schools and where they kind of live in this educational paradigm that we see nowadays.
Right, and I think you alluded, or you said it clearly, actually nothing alluded, is that they are a great draw with low-income families, and that is very much true in Michigan, where I live, where charter schools are wildly popular,
Right.
Especially in the cities. And one of the reasons are the cold, brutal facts. Like, for example, Detroit spends about $14,000 per year per student,
Wow.
and the students there have the worst reading scores in the nation. How
Right.
about that?
Sounds familiar.
So, exactly. So charter schools have really come in there and offered an alternative to a lot of these parents who were just going, what is going on here? So in that respect, I do support them for giving, parents who need that and children who need that an option. And some of these charter schools are extremely successful, and, more power to them.
And I've always thought it's the element of choice. I come from a free market
Exactly.
background, and I think that, whether you're making a charter school compete with another charter school or compete with a public school, they're competing for those dollars, and if they've got to actually work for it, they might work a little bit harder.
Exactly, right. And that is all under the school choice umbrella, which I am a supporter of, for sure, and trying to get the government union monopoly out of education, which is one of the worst things that ever happened to American education besides John Dewey. So for sure, it's just another opportunity for people to get out of that box and look at other possibilities. And so many times parents are so excited to see what's happening with their children in the learning environment in charter schools.
Right. Well, and you brought up something that I think is important. You brought up the funding argument, and in Kansas, if you dare say anything about against the KEA, the teachers union here in Kansas, you are immediately a bigot who hates children and wants to see them die in the streets. But
Ouch.
it's true. We had our one of our other programs here on the station was quoted in the New York Times because he referred to public schools as government schools, and what a horrible, bigoted thing to say, right? Because we're sending our child to a government school every day. That's the facts of life. But you brought up kind of the funding argument, which a lot of people will say that doesn't. When you let parents have school choice, doesn't that mean less money for the public schools?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It means less money for the public schools, and that could be a good thing.
Right.
Because, again, the argument has always been, let's throw more money and we're going to get better results. How many years have we heard that
Right.
one? And the money typically goes into a black hole. Now, again, having said that, I know that there are some really good public schools and good public school teachers and all that. However, there is an issue of unfairness and equity in that people who pay property taxes are required to pay this money whether they like it or not. And I don't understand why we never have a conversation about the fairness or the equity of that. I mean, especially a lot of senior citizens on fixed incomes who have to pay property taxes to fund schools. Nobody seems to care too much about that in our state legislatures.
Absolutely, and I would say the same is true here. By the way, you mentioned, and I'll try to pull up the numbers in the next segment maybe, but you mentioned that they're spending how much again per student in Detroit?
It was something like $14,000.
Wow.
Dollars per year per student, and yeah, you can certainly look that number, up if you want. And that's across the country, these
Absolutely.
kind of ridiculous numbers.
Well, and it's very similar in Kansas, and we'll get into this more in the next segment, but it seems like every single legislative cycle in Kansas, they say they, meaning the left, will tell the right, meaning Topeka, that you do not have enough money in this budget for school funding, even though it is over 60% of our state's finances goes to schools. I mean,
wow.
When people hear that, they can't believe it, but it's true. A totally insane amount of money going to these schools. So every year they say that we're not spending enough. The left kicks and screams. They take it all the way to the Kansas Supreme Court, and the Kansas Supreme Court has now taken the, role of legislators because they will actually give the legislature a number and say, this is what you have to pass. Tell us, it's so totally insane. What is your perspective on this from somebody who doesn't live in the great wheat state of Kansas? Because to us, it's normal. We're like the fish in water. But how does that sound to you?
Well, the whole idea of court-driven education reform basically is what you're describing to me.
Right.
And again, that's just judicial activism or judicial fiatism, if you want to call it. I'm making up that word, but that's totally unacceptable. I mean, this is an issue for parents to decide, or the people of Kansas, or the legislature. The last people on that list should be these judges.
I'd like to talk about that more in the next segment. I think we're coming up against the break here shortly, because that is really what it all comes down to, and maybe that's what we can cap this off in our final segment together, because it comes down to the parents. You know, the parents should be making these decisions. If the parent, and they should be making all of these decisions because it's their children, and I want to bounce a couple more of these ideas off of you as a homeschool advocate in the next segment, because from all of the things, you know, in Wichita, they recently decided some schools needed to start early to save money, and even that type of thing is totally insane. You know, we're going to wake 5-year-olds up at 5 in the morning to go to kindergarten. I don't know why more.
No.
Right. I don't know why more parents don't put their foot down and say, "This is my child. This is my family. This is my choice."
Yes.
We've got to take a moment off.
Yes.
You're watching The Honest Media. We have, of course, Craig Chrysler. Isabel Lyman is our guest. She is a homeschool advocate, a college professor, and an elected official in the great state of Michigan. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to The Honest Media. Again, I'm Tom Pappert here with Craig Chrysler, and our special guest this week coming to us via phone is Isabel Lyman, Izzy Lyman. She is a homeschool advocate, and I'm going to go ahead and call her an expert. She's written a book on the subject. Maybe we can get that in. It's still on Amazon, but she's not making any money from it anymore. It just winds up on Amazon somehow, the way, you know, Jeff Bezos has to make some money, right? So,
right.
But we've got her here today talking about schools and school choice, really. And as we said in the last segment, I don't understand the parenting thought process that happens. And we were talking in the break we just had a minute ago, and I like to ask parents, because I know a few in my life, you know, if you had $12,000 a year, which is about what we spend per pupil in Kansas, if you had $12,000 a year for your child's education, how would you spend it? And the chances are they're not going to say, well, I'm going to keep sending my child to Southeast High School, because it doesn't compute that way. Mm-hmm. So Isabel, tell us a little bit, if you will, what are the different ways right now that parents can actually have a say in their child's education?
Oh, well, in different ways, definitely through homeschooling.
Right.
Definitely investigating, perhaps, if they don't want to go that route. And, you know, an online academy, you said that, is taking off in Kansas. There are some Christian schools that have sometimes allowed homeschoolers to take a class or two. That might be a possibility to look into, or even just, you know, a religious education is always an option. You know, the idea of maybe going to community college earlier, like that is a trend that's also picking up, where students are able to start taking classes at high school and the community college, so you can get that started as early as 16. I would also say trade schools are a wonderful option for those young people that really don't want to, you know, spend a lot of time in books, but just start wanting getting their hands dirty, as I say.
Sure.
So all of those, you know, I think it just involves researching your child, seeing what your child needs. Maybe your child needs to take a year off from learning and do something completely different and creative with their lives.
And now, before we move on, because I have some more questions I want to get to, but, you know, you talked about that, and that's something that I've read about in the past. You know, it's been called unschooling. It's been called, you know, your child just needs time to relax after going through traumatic school for 5 or 6 years, however long it's been. But tell people, what is, you know, okay, so I'll give you a scenario. Now, say I am Mr. Parent, and I have a child, and I know that their teacher is awful, their peers are terrible, I can't get them into another school because we can't get the transfer approved, I don't have time to drive, I don't have the money to send them to a private school, et cetera, but I'm just terrified my child will fall behind. So what is the worst that will happen if a child takes a year off of education, like you said, or just falls a little bit behind?
Well, I don't think that is the worst. that might be the very best thing for their psyche, because we often talk about education in terms of cramming facts into someone's brain, like, stuffing a turkey.
Right.
When really, we also have to consider we're more than that. We are a personality, we have emotions, we have a spiritual side. So maybe you want to dedicate a year to that, which I think is extremely important in terms of emotional and mental health.
And so now, are the bad guys going to come and get you as a parent? Is the government going to come in their black helicopters and get you if you do that to your child?
Yeah, right, exactly. No, I understand. There's definitely some protocols in some states, that you
Right.
have to follow. Like Massachusetts, where I homeschooled, it was a very regulated state, so we did have to come up with a reasonable curriculum plan.
Sure.
Another state was Oklahoma that I also homeschooled in, and they were like, you want to start homeschooling? You just start homeschooling. They're going to pretty much leave you alone.
And I think that's probably the best case scenario.
Yeah, so I guess, as the Bible says, you render unto Caesar reasonably, and you
Sure.
do have to follow some protocol. I believe that is appropriate, so you don't really want to put yourself at risk with your child, never in a million years. But however, you also have to do what you think is right and best for your family, and that might be proactive and maybe a little aggressive at times. Certainly, I'm familiar with homeschooling parents who've gotten in trouble over the years
Right.
with the law, and sometimes fought back very successfully.
Now, in our kind of final, I know we've got a few more minutes together here. I want to kind of, what are some of the main concerns that homeschool parents have, and how would you address those? The ones I haven't addressed, which I know we've addressed, socialization, which a lot of people worry
Yes.
about. We've addressed parents thinking that they're just so incompetent. But what else really gets people hung up when it comes to homeschool?
Well, I think the problem is it's like the pre-mentality that parents themselves often are a product of the collective public school, left-wing mindset, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
So they're sort of entrapped in a mindset that I think they have to break free from. What are their political philosophies?
Sure.
How do they view the role of government? How do they want to spend their money? How do they want to control the entertainment? I mean, if they really start thinking about these things deeply and profoundly, even if it's for a week,
Right.
maybe they will feel a little bit better about empowering themselves. I think a matter of empowering you to think that this is your opportunity to make a lifetime investment in your son or daughter, and not turn it over to these so-called professionals
Right.
for day after day of sometimes, unfortunately, mindless indoctrination in some cases. Not all, but that is a reality.
Well, and I mean, I would just have to ask parents out there, how much do you remember from your freshman biology class? How much of this are you using in life today? We've got a whole generation of people who think that gender is on a spectrum and XXXY doesn't matter. So I would just wager that it's not doing its job, this this type of standardized education. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Izzy. I want to give you the final thoughts. Go ahead and plug your book if you want to. I know it's a little long in the tooth, but tell people how they can find your book, how they can keep in touch with you, that type of stuff.
Yes, since I have the book on Amazon, but I don't sell it, but I'm always happy to give it to anybody who wants it, actually.
Right. Okay.
So that's obviously I never made a lot of money off any of this homeschooling, and I homeschool on a shoestring budget, just for the record. So,
Sure.
But that's good. It's all good. I do have a Facebook page for my city council. Perhaps if they want to message me via that might be the easiest way.
Okay.
And it's Izzy Lyman, City Council. That's my address.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure to get that out there. And hopefully, if nothing else, we've got some parents out there who are maybe thinking about taking the plunge, because it's something that, like you say, it's not that hard. It's not that impossible.
Right. And, let me just also encourage them. They don't feel like they have to make a commitment for the entire rest of their life. Like, maybe just give it a year or
Sure.
give it a semester. That's the beauty of it, that you can, if it doesn't work out for you, you can go and try another option. Just like if you don't like Burger King, you go to McDonald's or you go to Wendy's.
Absolutely. The beauty of choice.
Home and eat home-cooked food.
Yeah, you stay home and you cook something in the crock pot, and there's your homeschool option. So a nice, nutritious home-cooked meal. I think that's a good analogy for us to end on. So thank you again for coming on. I hope we're getting ready to start our next legislative cycle, and as education once again becomes a hot topic, a hot button issue in Kansas, I hope we can have you back on the show.
Oh, I I do too, and I certainly hope Chris Kobach is your next governor because he's got a homeschooling background of his own with his children.
Absolutely, and we have one heck of a race coming up. I'm going to hold off on my endorsement, but people who watch the show know I'm a big fan of Kobach for immigration, for homeschool, and for everything else. So once again, thank you for being with us. We've got to take a moment off. You're watching The Honest Media, and we'll be right back in just a couple minutes. Welcome back to The Honest Media. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Izzy Lyman, homeschooling expert. She is a wealth of information, and I hope we can have her back on the show soon because we need an outsider perspective on what's happening with Kansas schools very desperately. They're getting no better, they're getting worse. On the national level, however, we have been rocked, or so the left would say, by this Bannon-Trump break. And we've got some information on it. We've got some analysis from somebody who I have followed for a very long time now. But Craig, and again, I want to tell people he's sick this week. He's going to be a little more quiet than usual, probably. But what is your take, before we get started in our analysis, on this Bannon-Trump situation?
Probably just a whole bunch of bull. To me, Bannon was probably drunk when he did his little tweeted or whatever, so that's about it.
You're not the first person I've heard say that, and I've heard that from people who are significantly closer to Bannon than two guys sitting here in Wichita, Kansas. And I don't mean geographically, but I want to kind of break into it a little bit because there's some thoughts on why on earth Bannon would do such a thing. For those who, I don't know, maybe you've been under a rock, Bannon has a quote in a book written by a guy named Wolf. This guy named Wolf is a liar, to put it charitably. He is known for making up quotes, making up sources in his books. However, it appears that the Bannon quote, in which he said that Don Jr. Is treasonous and that the Trump meeting with the Russian, whoever it was, private citizen, it's so contrived. But basically, Bannon allegedly said a very long time ago now that this was going to sink the Trump family. This came out in this book. The book is now being blocked by the Trump legal team because apparently it has a bunch of lies in it. Who would have thought? But anyway, this quote with Bannon appears to be real. Bannon has made a quote, and this is largely seen, Craig, as Bannon turning against Trump. I've seen it said as Bannon attacks Trump, Bannon turns on this White House, on the gut. The Daily Beast is framing this as Steve Bannon has done he's on the left as far as they're concerned. The Daily Beast is now a Bannon fan.
Yeah. Well.
And if you're familiar with the Daily Beast, they are they're worse than BuzzFeed. So the left has adopted Bannon. There's been some analysis that I want to share, though, and it's based on an article initially. Actually, that's what we've got here. But there's a guy on Twitter who some of you may know, goes by the handle Comrade Stump, and he's turned me on to this for a very long time. For over a year, he's been talking about FDR, he's been talking about Stalin, he's been talking about Bannon and Trump. And those are weird names to put together, but, history repeats itself. And FDR, President Roosevelt, he had this guy named Huey Long, who was a confidant, who was a strategist. He is largely credited with coming up with a lot of FDR's policies. FDR is, of course, basically Mao's Zedong, except he died earlier. Largely considered one of our worst presidents, unless you swallow the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
However, Huey Long set himself up to be the next guy, to be the successor to Roosevelt. Roosevelt was in office for 15 years, something crazy like that, till he died. It was till he died. In 1935, Huey Long broke with FDR. He said lots of nasty things about FDR. Huey Long, by the way, had the entire state of Louisiana under his control. He was the governor. All the legislatures agreed with him. He had strong-armed the city of New Orleans to the point where there was no opposition to him. It was joked that he controlled everything in the city of New Orleans except for the Red Cross. And the dog catcher, I think, is how the joke went. He controlled everything but the dog catcher and the Red Cross. And he ended up being assassinated in 1935 for those playing at home, but he had, just before he'd been assassinated, started a presidential campaign as a third-party candidate running against FDR. Bannon, it is now rumored, is running as a third-party candidate in 2020 against Trump. However, with Huey Long, there were significant, because FDR, it is largely, we now know, he had no morals, he had no beliefs, it was whatever to get elected. His economic policy advisors say he was an idiot. He didn't understand money at all. He had no idea how it happened. He just did what people told him to do. So, Huey Long broke with him publicly. It was all over the papers of the day. It was very similar to what we see with Bannon and Trump. Except Huey Long, I would say, timed it a little bit better, and he was further to the left. He has been described, if you read his Wikipedia page, as further to the left than Stalin, Mao, and Marx. So there was a significant difference between Huey Long and FDR. The problem with Bannon, I don't think there's that significant of a difference between Bannon and Trump.
Yeah.
And I think, and we've got an article, if you can pull this up, gentlemen, that says, from InfoWars, it's our only one for the day from InfoWars, it looks like people aren't siding with Mr. Bannon.
Yeah, no, I don't think he's going to have much support over Trump then.
That's the thing. I mean, this guy is his head that big that he thinks he has enough star power to muscle out the president of the United States?
And who knows if any of this is even true. So.
But he's not denying it. Late last night on his radio show, Bannon made a statement, or it was reported on Fox that he made a statement. I wrote it down. Steve Bannon answered a caller's question a short time ago on Sirius XM radio about this feud he's having with the president. Bannon said, quote, "The president of the United States is a great man. You know I support him day in and day out." That's Bannon. That's all he had to say. However, and I haven't had time to disseminate this. I actually found it just before this break. Maybe we won't get into it in this. We'll hold off on that. But allegedly, Bannon has disparaged Trump more and the Trump campaign more since then. So this is snowballing. This is escalating.
No,
that's not the way we wanted it to go.
Well, to me, no big deal. Bannon's a nobody, really. So.
That's kind of my prerogative. And we're not going to waste the whole show on this. I just wanted to point out the historical significance and whether or not Bannon really does think he is going to be this century's Huey Long. You know, Bannon does have this philosophy. He believes the cycles repeat themselves in 80-year increments. We're coming up on about 80 years. I don't know. That's what we've got. Bannon is, he's been given a cease and desist by the Trump legal team. Like any position, he was given a non-disclosure. He's not supposed to disparage Trump, the family, the company, or the campaign. He managed to do all of those in like a sentence in that book. So he has been blocked he's been given a cease and desist, at least. We'll see what comes up from. We'll see if there's a lawsuit that actually comes from this. The Trump campaign, the Trump legal team has done the same thing to Wolf, the guy writing the book. And the book, of course, we didn't mention this, has a title. It's Michael Wolf is the book's name. And Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. And it says in the first 5 pages of the book, by the way, Craig, that some of it is straight up lies. He admits it. He says some of what is in this book has no sources and is not true. He admits it.
I think over 30 people have came forward and said that he just made stuff up about what they said.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of them, I mean, there are some high-profile people I heard, and don't quote me on this, but in fact, we'll get back to it in the next segment. Maybe we can get a list of these people who have said that it is completely untrue. You're watching The Honest Media. I'm Tom Pappert here with Craig Chrysler. We've got to take a moment off. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to The Honest Media. We're going to have some fun for the rest of the show. How is this for a headline, Craig? This is somebody who you and me were not too sure about. This is the headline. In an attempt to avoid French Trump, French voters accidentally elected a French Hitler. Macron, of course, is who we're talking about. You know, we a lot of us here and you know, I was very skeptical of even caring about France for many reasons. Cheese-eating surrender monkeys. But a lot of people wanted Le Pen to win. And she was, by all accounts, a nationalist. She was a patriot. She sounded a lot like Trump. But Macron is governing a lot like Trump.
Yeah, he did a total 180 once he got in office for a little bit.
Yeah, and that is that's something we generally do not expect people on our side to do. It is the duplicitous nature of a leftist, and it's coming from somebody who maybe is a good guy.
Thinks he's a Roman god.
Thinks he's a Roman god. Said he would rule as the Roman god Jupiter. So this comes out as via Squawker, and it's kind of a fun piece. I've got some excerpts here that I'll read as we go along, and then Craig and I will talk about it for a bit because. And we've got to have our friend Dan back on the show because he was the most anti-Macron person I ever met in my life. I want to know what he thinks now. Yeah. Since Macron's election to the French presidency, he has executed a number of political orders that voters may find particularly antithetical to liberalism. Under Macron, the French government has recently worked to set up a new tax department specifically to target and investigate tax evasion by French Jews. He has also held a firm to a staunch immigration policy. Macron said in a speech in July in Orleans before a group of new citizens that he wanted people off the streets and out of the woods by the end of 2017. He's, of course, talking about migrants who are living in open-air ghettos, such as the jungle at Calais. He once said, let's see if I can find it here, he has renamed the French Ministry of Defense to the French Ministry of Armies, signaling he wants to once again be a military superpower for the first time since, I guess, Napoleon. Maybe. This is a quote he said about Africa, by the way, just about 4 months ago now. The challenge of Africa is completely different. It is much deeper. One of the essential challenges of Africa, one of the countries that has 7 or 8 children born to each woman. You can choose to spend thousands of euros, but you will stabilize nothing. And frankly, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's completely true. How much money has been thrown at Africa over the last 50 years alone?
Countless amounts.
Billions of dollars,
countless.
to say the least. I mean, countless. You literally could not count it. And what do we get? We've got Somalia with no government. It's anarchy. We've got pirates who...
you got guys named General Butt Naked running around killing people.
You got Boko Haram out there. You've got ISIS getting new allies all throughout Africa. You have South Africa where there is a white genocide happening right before our eyes. The world is silent about it, but white people are being hunted down and exterminated.
Yeah.
All of these things in Africa. And what is the solution? Well, let them come to Europe.
Yeah.
And it looks like Macron, maybe he didn't know about it till he got behind the scenes, but it looks like he's seen the writing on the wall, and it looks like he's going to go a little bit nationalist.
It looks like it. It looks like he's heading in the right direction.
Which, I mean... Who would have ever thought this time it wasn't even this time last year, but I mean, I vividly remember the Macron period or the Macron-Le Pen election when all the dirty tricks that Macron pulled and the violence that Le Pen went. And I think that's something that's just underappreciated here. This would be like if Obama suddenly started building a wall on the southern border. It is that much of a bait and switch. Is that something that we should respect, Craig, or should we be saying, hey, wait a minute, what this guy did is not cool. That's not how the right should act?
I'm liking it so far. So
results matter, right?
Yeah, he must have got in there. Trump came over to visit him, and he acted totally different ever since.
That's true. See, we don't need any audio on this. While we're talking, see if you can pull up that video of the world's longest handshake between Macron and Trump. It was a hilarious video. See if we can play a little bit of that. But they had a really good meeting. And a lot of people were perplexed because everybody thought Trump wanted Le Pen to win. Yep. Maybe he knew. Maybe he knew something we didn't. It's been very interesting.
And now whatever website is calling him Hitler because he's having the Jews checked in for their tax evasion, I guess.
Right, saying that he is literally Hitler. If you read the reasons why they do this, France has a tax evasion problems. You know how everybody does. Oh, good, we've got the video. Yeah, play a little bit of this. It's Macron and Trump shaking hands. And just tell me when it's over, gentlemen, because this is the most common. You've seen this, right, Craig?
Oh, yeah.
But You know, people always ask, why does Trump do this? It's a photo op. You shake hands for like 5 minutes, giving the media all the time in the world to get their pictures. But Macron in this video looks a little bit perplexed. He's not quite sure what to do. I think he's kind of like walking around. Yeah, that's, and it just keeps on going. Is it done yet, fellas?
No, 29.
It just keeps going. See, thank you for pulling that up for me. I appreciate it. That is Macron. You know, I used to call him Macaroni. He has earned the right to no longer be called Macaroni now. I'll give it to him. This is another, by the way. He has been defending the French monarchy.
Has he?
The French monarchy. Maybe he'll rename himself Louis. In an interview recorded in the book Macron par Macron, the French leader details his regret over the absence of monarchism in France. Some have taken his words to infer that Macron is a crypto-fascist, biding his time to issue a revolution to usher in a new era of the Macron dynasty. However, it is more likely he is simply referring to a power vacuum caused by the death of Napoleon III, a topic commonly debated in France. But again, this guy, and now you've got Merkel. Merkel is depending on this guy. She's begging him to help her because she cannot stabilize the European Union. Her government is in disarray. She doesn't have a government formed right now. You know, the way it works in Germany, which, tell me, you know, you think American politics are bad, folks. In Germany, you have all these different little parties. We'll say the ruling party doesn't have the majority of the voters in the parliament or whatever they have there. I don't remember at the moment. They have to form a coalition with other parties. So you've got Angela Merkel, who is supposed to be a right of center person right now, who is allying with the far, far left socialists in order to try to make a government. It's not looking well. She is actually going as far as to say that France is what's going to be holding the European Union together in the future. I'll pull that up and we'll talk about it in the next segment. Thank you for joining us this week. We'll be right back in the Honest Media. Welcome back to the Honest Media. I'm Tom Pappard, your host with Craig Chrysler. We've been talking about Macron these past couple segments in France. I didn't know we'd be going so far into this segment, but you know, it's very interesting. I think the viewers at home probably find this interesting too, because if you're just watching Newsmax, if you're just watching InfoWars, you know, they talk about the same stuff. We try to give you something different. So now, again, this is the State of Merkel. And before we go to what I want, no, we'll start there because we were talking about Macron. Merkel pledges quick government formation, Germany-France cooperation in New Year. That comes to us from Xinhua Net, a Chinese news source, but they were quoting the German chancellor directly. And now, Craig, I mean, just try to wrap your head around that for a minute. We have just seen Macron called a crypto-fascist, the next Benito Mussolini. We've had him called Hitler, literally compared to Hitler. And just a minute ago, you heard me read it. How desperate is Mother Angela Merkel, Mother Merkel, how desperate is she if she is willing to work with Macron?
Well, everything she's touched has fell to complete
ruin.
Word. Yeah, that's
it's
the
gone.
nice word.
That's the nice word.
I was trying to find the nice word.
That's the nice word, but it's true.
Completely destroyed Europe, everything else. I hope Macron does reestablish a monarchy there and England as well and get things back on track there in Europe.
You know, they can't do any worse.
That's right.
You know, people have a lot of...
To defeat Islam, they probably will have to reestablish the monarchies there.
Well, things are going to have to get harsh, no matter what way you look at it.
Yeah.
And what is the quote? I'm going to butcher it. I can't even think of who it's from. It'll come to me. Maybe you can talk and I'll look it up. But what is it? The biggest argument against democracy is a 15-minute conversation with the average voter. You know? It's so true.
Yeah.
And again, these people in France, they thought they were electing a moderate. They thought they were electing a progressive. They thought they were electing Barack Obama with a little bit different skin complexion. Not that much.
Yeah.
But no, they got French Hitler.
Yeah.
That is who they got.
Yeah, that's the best possible thing could have happened for France.
Now,
instead of the real Hitler.
I was going to say, keep in mind, nowadays, to be called Hitler is basically a badge of honor.
Yes, it is.
Just a quick recap. Trump's been called Hitler. Mitt Romney's been called Hitler. George W. Bush has been called Hitler. Ronald Reagan was called Hitler. If you are on the right, basically...
Even Obama's been called Hitler.
Obama has been called Hitler, yes, by the right. You know, it is Godwin's law. The first person to invoke Hitler in an argument loses.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. But if you haven't been called Hitler in the current year, you're doing it wrong. So we got to put that out there. But so French Hitler probably means French anybody right of center.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll kind of go on about this. Merkel is not in a good spot. She says that the German people have become more aware and hold us together. Now, I want to bring up a Der Spiegel opinion piece, not usually the place I would go to for an opinion, but this is an interesting one. It is surveying the ruins of Merkelism. And we'll just read the byline here. It's the Merkel era has been characterized by a deep yearning for stability, yet her tenure has led to Germany's current position of instability. It's time to move away from Merkelism. And this is a brilliant essay. I suggest everybody read it. We don't have time to go through it the way I really want to today, because I would love to take this apart piece by piece and give you all the evidence that this is actually happening. But this is the quote that I wanted here. Meanwhile, Merkelism lies in ruins. The aim of Merkelism has been to calm the country, but its refugees policies and the ensuing loss of control triggered agitation instead. It sought stability at almost any price, but it has pushed the country into one of its most unstable periods. The biggest problem with Merkelism, though, has recently emerged as Merkel herself. She has now become associated with an end and not with a new beginning. The article talks about, as I said, Merkel is working. She's always been a right-of-center party. You know, we're talking about Jeb Bush, right of center.
I don't know who calls her right of center. She's left of the left.
Well, that's the thing.
Me.
She has been dragged, kicking and, well, not kicking and screaming, her grinning, smiling and laughing so far to the left. She might as well be a Bernie Sanders socialist. I mean, there is fundamentally no different. And we have now seen, I almost have to say thank you, Angela, because we have seen the Alternative for Deutschland Party, AfD, they have risen to the third largest party in Germany. People like to say they're racist, they're bigots, they're whatever. Find something in their party platform that is those things. I dare you. I dare you to do it. By the way, Germany... Sorry, Craig, I know you're about to say something.
Oh, no, go ahead.
But Germany recently started a new censorship law is what it is. But it is an anti-bad speech law. It is don't say things that hurt people's feelings law. And actually what it did is the German AfD party member, one of the leading members, actually a government official, said, how insane is it that our public government documents are printed in Arabic? What is happening to our country? They were suspended from Twitter. They are being legal issues are being pursued against them for that. That is basically the tweet. You can look it up. It was a little bit harsher. She didn't say anything outside of the mainstream. She said nothing that Nigel Farage, a quick trip across the channel, wouldn't say. It was totally within the frame of the mainstream. And in Germany, you can go to jail for that.
You can go to jail for lots of stupid things in Germany besides raping and killing people if you're a migrant.
Can't do that. No. You can't do that. In fact, we could. Oh God, I shouldn't even joke about this. But there was just an article the other day, and I believe this was in Germany. I may be wrong. I've been sick. I'm getting my facts confused. But I believe this was in Germany. Maybe you can look this up, Mr. Producer. A woman was raped during labor by a migrant.
Oh wow!
Raped during labor by a migrant. The same time span, you don't have to look this one up. One shocking, horrifying thing is enough. But another shocking thing I saw, 2 men in an elderly person's home in an assisted living raped by migrants. 2 men, elderly men, old men.
So that's totally fine, Tom.
No,
the
that's
migrants
not.
can do whatever they want.
Germany, by the way, had a, give me a thumbs up if you find that article. See, put that up on screen. That is the utter state of Germany. That is Germany. That is Merkelism. That is Merkelism.
They need to complete 180 there.
Well, but the thing is, they criticize the rest of the world. Oh, how dare you have Trump? How dare you have this? How dare you have that? But in Germany, this is how politics work.
Germany used to have a nice monarchy as well.
That's true.
They need to go back to that.
But this is how German politics work, Craig. They have a monarchy because here's how we have an election. No matter what, Merkel wins.
Yeah.
That's how German politics work right now.
Pretty much.
There was over New Year's, by the way, they had a woman safe zone, like where no Muslims were allowed. Like they had a zone with police officers to keep women from being raped by migrants during the New Year. But again, none of this is bad. No, you're just an anti-Islamic
At
bigot.
least they did that.
At least they had a smell. But I mean, that is terrible. Imagine in Wichita, Kansas, if we told women the only spot you're not going to be raped at Riverfest is right up here by Century 2.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, you're going to get raped, ladies. That's how it works. But that's blaming the victim. That is what we've been preached against for decades, you and me both. And yet, that's what we do in Germany to keep the trucks of peace.
Well, maybe these 80-year cycles, whoever was talking about, it's time to roll back around there.
Maybe we're getting there. And I don't know. Maybe we'll go back to Mr. Macron for a minute. Good luck. Maybe you can talk some sense into your neighbor, Ms. Merkel. It's been a fun episode. I hope you enjoyed our interview at the top of the show. If you haven't noticed, Craig and I are both fighting through the flu. He's got it worse than I do this week, so thanks for bearing with us. It's been difficult, to put it nicely. We'll see you again next week on The Honest Media, same time, same place.